This program was produced by and first broadcast on Radio Kidnappers, a volunteer-based community access station. For more information, go to www.radiokidnappers.org.nz. Thanks to New Zealand On Air for making this program available through funding the Access Internet Radio project.
This is Jeremy Roberts on behalf of Hawke's Bay Poetry Live, a program broadcast weekly on Monday afternoons at 1:30pm. You can also go to the Radio Kidnappers website to listen to previous interviews. You can click play or download if you want. My guest today is Duncan Bowles of Napier. Duncan was born and bred in London. He has been living in New Zealand on and off since 1990 when he qualified as an osteopath. Duncan travelled extensively in the 90s and landed permanently in New Zealand in 2000. He has worked at Napier Port for the last few years, where he finds the physical outdoor work conducive to developing any creative ideas or concepts that arrive in his head. And we're going to hear some of those ideas in the form of poetry today. Welcome to the show, Duncan.
Hello, thank you.
Duncan, let's start at the beginning. When did you start writing poetry?
Probably at school, I suppose, when we had no choice. But I did go to quite a good school in North London, and we did do a lot of poetry, a lot of literature, a lot of Shakespeare, and a lot of First World War poetry and that sort of stuff. So there's always those to have a go in the style of that sort of thing. You know, what did you do in your holidays in poetic form? So yeah, a lot of stuff at school.
Oh, fantastic!
Yeah, but not a burning desire to write it myself, apart from being told to do it. But yeah, I did have a good grounding, shall we say?
I know in the British curriculum they have a you actually have to memorise and recite poetry. To this day, that happens. Do you have memories of that? Did you?
I can still recite some of Virgil's Aeneid from the translated from the Latin. Yes, if you really want me to.
Oh, we might ask you later on to do a bit of that. Wow.
Yes, I can do that.
So yeah. that was at a very young age, your school years. When did you start then as an adult? When did that kick in?
Well, I've always doodled around writing and reading, and I read a lot. I read extensively all the time. I'm always reading something. You know, I'm the sort of person who's on the train, if I can't find anything to read, I'm scrabbling around on the floor trying to find a bit of newspaper to read, so I've got something to read to fill the time in. So I'm always reading. When did I start doing properly and enjoying it as much as I do now? Probably when I stopped drinking, actually, about 4 or 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. I mean, alcohol's great for ideas, but it's a shocking medium for transferring them to paper.
Yeah.
Especially with my handwriting. I've got 4 or 5 notebooks that probably nobody will ever be able to read. But yes, since I stopped doing that, filling in the time more constructively, I suppose, yeah, probably the last 4 or 5 years, probably.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, the writing and drinking thing is a very interesting relationship, isn't it?
Yeah, it worked for Dylan Thomas, I know, but it never really worked for me.
I'm sure there's a few poets out there opening a bottle of Chardonnay to help them get that final line.
Yeah, I'm usually the other way around. I like something to stimulate me to get the initial idea, and then I'm better off to muck around with it as I go.
Yeah, that's pretty common, isn't it?
Yeah, because most of my ideas come from a little spark and then get bigger from there.
Ah, well, I'd very much like to talk to you more about that later. Why don't we just launch straight into it? Would you like to read a poem, Duncan?
Yes, okay. I will do one that's been gestating for a while and I quite like. How does it go now? It goes, running through fields of dead flowers, roses and poppies, heads hung low, choking on petals with thorns in her side, she stops and she gathers enough for a crown. Stigmatizing herself, she takes up the mantle of an unwilling queen. Standing with her back against the rain, summoning her thunder, her lightning and her clouds, elemental and proud, storming out of mind and into lives. As her stories collide to crimson the pool, she raises her truth and draws down the moon, lighting silver the sky, an affront in their unseeing eyes, opaque, blind, drowning their sea of old lies.
Wow. There's quite a lot to consider in that piece, Duncan. I can imagine different people taking or making very different meanings out of it. Thank you for that introductory piece. Duncan, which poets do you enjoy the most?
Oh, quite a few, but I suppose if I was going to really pick idols, if you want idols, I suppose, Patti Smith has always been a huge inspiration to me.
Sure.
Watching this demure, softly spoken woman in interview transform into a invective spewing oracle almost, if you like.
Quite remarkable, isn't it?
Phenomenal.
If you see her interviewed, she looks like, how would you describe it? A friendly, normal type of person. And then, she can become
an intelligent, deep-thinking woman.
Like a demon.
Yeah, and she just changes and feeds. I think she feeds off the crowd as well. Like I've seen her interviewed many times where she talks about her responsibility is to absorb the energy from the crowd and reflect it back at them.
Yeah.
Which you can see, I think, when you see her in full flow.
Yeah, no, she's a force of poetry. Anybody else?
Quite a few musicians from that similar sort of concepts. I mean, Lou Reed, obviously, similar era to Patti Smith, a little bit sooner, maybe, but quite a wonderful street poet. Nick Cave, obviously, a wonderful lyrical songwriter who I admire very much and could read and listen to his stuff a lot. Some Jim Morrison stuff.
Yeah,
I found him. People remember him as a musician rather than a drunkard, but in actual fact, he's a very stunning poet. Very deeply reflective on what his words mean.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that.
Which is something I'd like to come to when we get to something else further down the line.
Sure.
Ian Dury, another musician, obviously. Rhyming couplets, wonderful. Bit more recent stuff, a lady called Kate Tempest. I don't know if anybody's heard of her. She's a British slam poet who does quite interesting musical stuff as well.
Yes.
She's worth looking up. If you look up her rendition of End Times, I think it's called, on YouTube.
Okay.
Who else have we got? Spike Milligan in his more serious moments.
Right, yeah.
Not so much the comedic stuff, which is all very well and good, but he does write some wonderful, much darker stuff, as people are aware.
Yep.
But yes, big fan of his. In fact, I was at his grave only a couple of months ago. I stumbled over it when I was in England, yes. In this little churchyard near where my uncle lives, and turned round out the church, and there he was. So that was quite pleasant.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. I noticed that, you have referred to quite a number of musicians, and I agree with you that the words that are applied, to rock and roll, they can be poetry, indeed. Patti
Smith always described it as 3 chords mixed with the power of the word, which I think is quite a nice description for what she was trying to do.
That's lovely, isn't it?
The more classical ones, if I can carry on. Sylvia Plath.
Yes.
Big fan of her.
Yes.
And her powerful imagery, I suppose. Yeah. T.S. Eliot as well.
Yep.
I like his stuff. The Hollow Men, I think, is quite a interesting, dark slant on life. More recent stuff. New Zealand poets, I suppose. Aparana Taylor. I like his stuff.
Yep.
She was fortunate to bump into him performing in the Rotunda in Waipawa when I was living in Waipawa.
Oh, brilliant.
That was a wonderful half an hour or an hour. And I, on the spot, bought a copy of his book and I've loved his stuff ever since.
Yeah, great.
So, big fan of his.
Fantastic.
Selena Marsh, obviously, is a wonderful performer. I've seen her a few times and I enjoy her voice and her imagery. Here, a Lindsay Bird, I find quite fun. Interesting.
Okay.
From a New Zealand perspective. A little bit different to some people's slants on poetry, but I like her stuff.
Why not?
Yes. And if we're going to go really older stuff, Blake and Coleridge, I suppose. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And I mentioned Virgil, but only because we had to do it at school, but I can still remember it.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that was my first epic poem, if you like.
Well, there's a reason those old people are remembered, you know, from hundreds of years ago. Yeah. Duncan, can I ask you to read another one?
Yes, I can. I did have a little list of ones that I wanted to get across here. I think, yeah, let's do that one, I think. Okay. How's it go? 4 horses down, reddened, black, so white, so pale, sword-lit eyes raise their trail. 4 horses down, hunger-mad souls twisting inside. 4 horses down, pestilent lies seep from their sides. 4 horses down, breathtaking hooves extinguishing lives. 4 horses down, charnel house bones applaud their ride. 4 horses down.
Very powerful imagery. Yeah, as I said before, much to ponder. I think you know, your work would be good to see on the page as well, so you can consider it and think about it.
Thank you. I mean, I do spend quite a bit of time jiggling them around on the page to work out the pauses that I think should be there. Somehow.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, no, I like the way you read. Duncan, what role do you think poetry plays in the community?
Now that's an interesting question, because I was actually thinking about that in a slightly bigger picture. I think community is just a shorter version of society. And I would like to actually read something that I think puts it more in it, well, more better, in a much more efficient way than I think I possibly could. And it's actually from Jim Morrison collection of poetry that I have with me right here.
Which one is that?
It's called Wilderness.
Oh, yeah.
The Lost Writings of Jim Morrison.
Yeah.
But he starts off with what he calls a self-interview, which is interesting. But the bit that I find most fascinating, I think, sums up poetry in so many ways and its essentialness, because people like a story. You know, stories are good. People love stories. But what he writes here is, listen, real poetry doesn't say anything. It just ticks off the possibilities, opens all doors. You can walk through any one that suits you. And that's why poetry appeals to me so much, because it's so eternal. As long as there are people, they can remember words and combinations of words. Nothing else can survive a Holocaust but poetry and songs. No one can remember an entire novel. No one can describe a film, a piece of sculpture, a painting. But so long as there are human beings, songs and poetry can continue. If my poetry aims to achieve anything, it's to deliver people from the limited ways in which they see and feel. And I couldn't sum it up any better than that, to be honest with you. So I think
that's a collection of statements. Some of those he made in interviews.
Yeah.
No, it's very inspiring, isn't it?
Yeah.
The man with 2 careers, really, old Jim. Number one pop song, and poetry that I think its reputation is quite high now.
Yes.
The Lords and the New Creatures
I've got
is a classic.
that as well. I bought that many years ago. But this one, as you can see, is very well battered. Because I find poetry good to take travelling with you, because you can read it over and over again.
Of course.
A novel you can read over and over again, but not straight away again, unless it's a really good book. But poetry you can keep dipping into as you go.
You can dip and flick through and find something. It's fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about your writing technique, Duncan. How does this work? You know, what inspires you? What challenges you the most? Do you do 100 drafts? How do you work?
Often I start off with one word or one statement or one thing that sort of gets into my head somehow as an emotion, which has some sort of a response in me. And interestingly enough, quite often it's a misspelling or a mishearing, which is, then my brain starts thinking, what if you then took that somewhere else and then somewhere else and somewhere else? And then I find that tends to get linked up with something else I might be thinking about. You know, like, say, a friend of mine's husband died a little while ago, and that sort of created a slant on a poem or an idea. but it came actually from a word, and the two got combined together as I was thinking about them. Mm-hmm. But an adage that I quite like to stick to, which is a description that I enjoy, is sort of maximum image for minimum wordage. So you can get, or other way around, minimum wordage, maximum image. You know, to try and get the message across with the minimum words, so that there's a certain amount of audience participation, and they can't just sit there and read the whole thing. They've got to be invested in it in some way, shape, or form to develop their own sights, sounds, and smells, if you like, in their head.
It sounds like you have your antenna up all the time, and you're receiving the incoming inspiration, really.
Yeah, well, I tend to find that happens all the time, actually. Little things, I'm always writing things down and that sort of stuff. I mean, not that long ago, I finished writing a book that I'd been writing for a while.
Yeah.
And the initial idea behind the characters and all that sort of stuff started off with a misspelling from my daughter, actually, on a text message. She sent a message that was meant to say, it's chilly-ish outside. And it came out, she spelled it wrong, it came out as chillish. I thought, that's a great word. That's a great name.
That is
a good name. The book starts off with Chillish Moon, and that was the beginning, and then the rest of it started from there. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So misspellings, mishearings, I think.
Playing with words.
Playing with words, yes. Yeah. I like playing with words.
So do you use symbols in your... I mean, you have a lot of imagery in your pieces. Are sometimes they symbols for other things? That, what I mean is that you have seen something, or you might be feeling something about an experience or something, and it goes through the Duncan filter and turns into something else.
Often, yes. Yeah, I mean, I'll think of a phrase or a turn of words that describes what I think is a good description for a particular emotion or a way of dealing with a situation. And then that will often create an image that sticks in my head, and then I will expand on that. I think that's probably the best way to describe it.
All right.
Yeah.
Look, before I get you to read another one, if I said, do you have any recurring themes? Because this is interesting with your work. I've heard you read live a few times. I've never held one of your poems in my hand, but I've heard you read, and I'm slowly forming a notion of what your poetry is about. But I wouldn't like to, pinpoint anything in particular. I'd rather hear it from you. Do you think there are any themes in your work?
There tend to be, I suppose. I mean, the Bible's obviously an easy option to picking stories and imagery from.
Right.
Not that I'm overly religious, but I enjoy religion. I like to see what keeps people going and keeps people sane and gets them through the day and through the night, regardless of what their own particular belief is. I think the concept of, is good, is useful, and it's a wonderful one for picking up little ideas and that sort of thing. Death's always a good one, I suppose. Death, love and death, if you want to combine the two. Family interactions, parents are getting older, so I mean, some of my poems are about that sort of thing, things getting older, things fading away, if you like. Drugs is always a good one as well. Substances, if you like, alcohol, marijuana, whatever takes people's fancy. Because I've had an interesting life, and a lot of my friends have had issues with various bits and pieces, and lots of long conversations with them has been quite interesting. So, yeah, just basically whatever takes my fancy, whatever seems to appeal.
Okay.
Is that a reasonable answer? Yeah.
That's a good answer. Yes, it's time for another poem, I think, Duncan. That'll be good.
Another poem. Okay. Now, where should we go with this one? Oh, well, I've talked about, theme of things fading, going away. So there's one here that, surprisingly enough, because mine often take a long time to refine, if you like. I start them off, and they end up far too long and verbose, and I trim them down. But this one actually was basically fully formed on the walk to work, which was quite interesting. It was only about a 10, 15-minute walk, so I was quite surprised.
Nice, yeah.
And it's an oldish one. It goes from, as slow falls the crow to beg in the dust, the small child's tears raise iron from rust. and the hollow-eyed beggar will lay down his crutch, so strangling binds can tighten their hold, and all around them oldens and goes, little by bit. So yeah, the decay and the fading away.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed about your reading at Napier Live Poets is people like to hear them again, and because they are fairly short and go by fast, I think people are trying to hang on to the images and think it through almost, but it's very hard to do first time round. And then, because I've seen you read them again more than once, haven't you? And I think
Yes.
that's a fascinating audience response, you know. Usually at the mic, poets don't read a poem twice, but
Yeah.
it just seems to work with yours because yours are short, and people are, well, those particular ones are short, and people are listening and thinking, okay, I'm with them. I need to go back and hear it again.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I quite like that. I think that's quite interesting. So that's what, I mean, people have to come maybe to the words with and put a bit of effort in as well, and rather than being spoon-fed the whole concept, if you like.
Well, yes. Well, why don't you read another one? The audience thing. The live. What's your impression of live poetry first before you read?
I think it's the only way to do it. Mm-hmm. The only way to really experience poetry properly, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's something that I enjoy very much, watching a poet in control of his audience and in full flow. Mm-hmm. Very much so.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's have another one, Duncan, and then I'd like to ask you something else.
Okay. I want to leave one right for the very last, so we're going to have time for another one after this one, or will this be the last one, do you think?
We've got 3 minutes.
So maybe do this as the last one then, shall we?
Okay.
Okay. Because this one I very much like, and it was written and started off as a observation, and then it became basically a love poem, if you like, to my partner, Naomi. And it goes like this. It goes, won't you take up my hand, my love, and believe with me, my love. Break free, craven angels, hanging from their gallows, and walk with me, my love. Bewail the penitent, rags of grief, shackles of blame, and lay with me, my love. And stay, if you will, your breath, my love. Shutter your eyes, remain for me, deeply, my love, down in the boneyard. Oh, my love.
Very powerful stuff, Duncan. Does a poem like that have roots in your own reality or your own life, or?
Possibly. I mean, I read a lot of stuff. You know, I read a lot of Gothic novels when I was younger. You know, Frankenstein, Dracula, all that sort of stuff. You know, all the stuff you're in inverted commas supposed to have read. But but I had a very wonderful English teacher when I was very small who introduced me to lots of wonderful writers and stuff. Some of the books I still have to this day, like 40-odd years later, still in my bookcase, because they had such a profound effect on me.
Oh,
so,
that's wonderful. Well, I think your work is very powerful, and if any of our listeners would like to see Duncan read, he reads at Napier Live Poets, and hopefully you'll come soon to Hawke's Bay Live Poets.
Oh, that's in Hastings.
In Hastings,
yes.
Duncan.
Yes.
I think your work would go over really well there. Duncan, before we leave, is there any, for audiences, obviously, okay, they can come and see you read, but looking in further down the line, is there any publication likely at any stage?
I'm hoping so. I'm in conversations with somebody who approached me to say that they were interested, and as a result, I went through my back catalogue and started compiling things and going them in some sort of order, which was an interesting project in itself, I must admit, trying to get them into some semblance of theme and order. And when I can catch up with them properly, which hopefully will be in the next 2 or 3 weeks, we can have a conversation from there.
Great. Well, thanks very much for coming in, Duncan.
Can I just point something out?
Yes.
When I write, I tend to write under a different name, just because I do. I write under MD Rogers.
Oh, okay.
It's the name that I tend to
All right.
put to my words, if you like.
Oh, we better look out for that name.
MD
in the
Rogers,
future.
yes.
MD
yes.
Rogers.
Just,
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks very much for listening to Hawke's Bay Live Poets. This is your host, Jeremy Roberts, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you.
This program was produced by and first broadcast on Radio Kidnappers, a volunteer-based community access station. For more information, go to www.radiokidnappers.org.nz. Thanks to New Zealand On Air for making this program available through funding the Access Internet Radio Project.